Hello everybody, today we're going to take a look at doing Hyper-V Manager exports of a virtual machine for the purposes of backup. This is going to be covering backup a little bit more, but this could also be used if you're migrating to a new machine. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is set up a storage location. Now typically you may have an external drive or a UNC path to a storage device. If you had an external drive, you'd have like D or E or F. You could click on that and use that to store. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to store in the root of C. I'm going to make a new folder and call it Hyper-V Exports. Okay, so we have that created. Now, the next thing you need to do here, let's close this so we can start at the beginning, is you need to launch Hyper-V Manager. Now, I have a shortcut down here, but if you do not have that, you could type in Hyper-V Manager. We'll launch that. So this should show you if you have one or multiple machines. This one is only running one virtual server. For information, it's running Debian. It's 3CX's pre-built ISO for their 3CX PBX box. Today what we're going to do is we're going to export this particular one. I'll go to the root of C here, Hyper-V Exports, and just click Select Folder, and then click Export. So typically what we're doing here is it's going to compact the whole system and all the settings and configurations and move them over. For the purposes of a backup, so if you have an issue you need to reinstall it, you just hit the go button, and we'll show you here shortly. If you are migrating, one of the things that we're not going to cover in this video, it's outside the scope, but is you would import it to a new system, but you would need to rematch some of your system resources like your NIC and things like that, and make sure you have enough CPU cores or RAM depending on your system. So while this is wrapping up, we'll step away for a second and we'll be back in a minute. Okay, and we're back after a couple minutes. That process will depend on the size of your virtual machine and how much it's doing. Mine, for example, is about 18 gigabytes, so it took a couple of minutes. But if you have a bigger system, or you're running a virtual Windows 10 or 11 system or something like that, or if you're running another server on a host server, that could take up a lot more time. But depending on what you're doing, like I said, that'll use a lot more time. So now if we come down here and bring up that folder, you'll see here, and it creates separate folders. I had no snapshots as the virtual hard drive for the system, and then there's the virtual machine configuration files. So for example, like if we're using this as a backup, this is your external drive, you did that. What I might do here is just put a date on it, just so that it differentiates from whatever. So in Windows naming conventions, you can't use certain characters, so instead of doing like a / for date, I just use periods. So like say if you're doing this and you do it daily or weekly, you could just leave that there if you have enough space, or you could just delete them if you need to, if you're doing several of these. So I have this one dated. Let's go back over here and we'll do the same process again, and then it will rename the same as the last one. But that way, and you can just hit select folder here as this folder. Don't select that one and put it in there. So just make sure you're on the Hyper-V Exports select folder, and you'll export that again. So if this was like the next Sunday or the next day or something, you're trying to do daily backups, this will reinitialize and go and do that process. So right now we're doing the export, and we'll step away for a minute and we'll be back in a couple minutes. And again, we're back after a couple minutes, so that has completed that other export. So you can see we have another one here. Now obviously if this was a different date, I would then change this to the date that it was. And that's pretty much how to do that. So for example here, what I'm going to do is we are now going to evaluate how you would restore that if you had an issue. So I'm going to turn off this virtual server, and I'm actually going to delete it. So we have deleted that server. So now from this point, what I would do to bring it in is first I want to double check and make sure everything was removed. So by default, Hyper-V stores its files under users, public documents, Hyper-V disk. So here's that virtual machine. So I'm actually going to come in here, and this was a fact if it lost or got corrupted, or if we had some point of data that was lost and we needed to recover, I would remove this. So that is now out of there. And then we'll go back to just C for now. The next step here is we'll come back to Hyper-V Manager, do import virtual machine, select next, locate folder. So we want to go to our folder on C where we were. This was the newest of the two, so we'll just go ahead and do that one, but you could select whichever date you needed, but you got to remember anything after that date would be lost, so you kind of want to use the most recent viable backup. So you click next. This will tell you when the virtual machine was created initially and the name of the host system. So we'll click next. Okay, now here are your different options. Like if you're moving to a new machine or you need to create a test system or something like that, you use copy. Register virtual machine in place using the existing unique ID will actually use the backup folder. So if you're on an external drive, you don't want to do that. So let's do restore, so it actually copies the data to the correct directories, which it should show you in the next couple windows. It's going to load the configuration. Okay, so this is going to tell you this is where it actually saw the backup from, so this is the default. So if you need to change that, you can select this, but for our purposes, we're going to leave it where that machine actually was. Click next. So this is going to ask you where you want to store that. You should just leave that alone. That should have been configured in the last page. And it gives you all the information to just review, and then click finish, and it will begin the import process. This will take a couple minutes depending on the size of your virtual machine. We'll let this run for a few minutes and then we'll be right back. And the import completed. Let's tell you the status is saved. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually coming here. We can review settings just to make sure there's nothing we need to really change. All that was as I had it set before. The virtual hard drive is connected, your virtual cores, and your virtual memory, and then your network adapter. Typically, if you switch systems, you would need to reconfigure this, but since this is coming in here, it's already there. We'll have the same MAC address, so that my DHCP reservation from my DHCP server will give this because I have port forwarding so that the system will function. So we can just click OK, and then we want to click Start. And the system's running. We can double click on it to see the progress. And it is currently at the Debian login screen. If you were running Windows or whatever, it looked like if you were sitting in front of a Windows machine. And then the other thing we want to check here is this was the system before. Let's refresh, and we're back in. Now the one thing for me is that my Grandstream Gateway will need rebooted to bring my phone lines back up, but that's unique to my situation. And that's how you would restore a backup using the export and import features of Hyper-V. Thank you very much for watching. We'll catch you later. Bye-bye.